A pharmacy fills a prescription, gets reimbursed by the insurer, books the sale as profitable, closes the books for the month. Then, weeks or sometimes months later, a fee shows up clawing back part of that exact payment, retroactively, for a sale that already happened and already closed. The pharmacy didn't do anything wrong. The math on a transaction they'd already counted as done simply changed, after the fact, without warning. That's not a hypothetical. Retroactive fees tied to pharmacy benefit managers are one of the defining financial realities of running an independent pharmacy right now, and they're a huge part of why gross margins in this industry have quietly slid to roughly 20%, a 10-year low, while net margins for a lot of independents hover in the low single digits. Open a pharmacy today, and you're not just running a healthcare business. You're running a business where a meaningful chunk of your revenue can be taken back after you've already spent it. Forget the image of a pharmacist counting pills behind a counter for a second. Financially, an independent pharmacy is a business squeezed between two much larger players it has almost no leverage over: insurance companies and the pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, who negotiate reimbursement rates on their behalf. Those PBMs decide what the pharmacy gets paid for filling a given prescription, and increasingly, that number sits below what the medication actually cost the pharmacy to acquire in the first place, a situation the industry bluntly calls an underwater reimbursement. On top of that, some contracts allow the PBM to apply retroactive adjustments, direct and indirect remuneration fees, months after the sale, based on performance metrics that are opaque and difficult to audit from the pharmacy's side. The prescription counter, in other words, isn't really where this business makes its money anymore. It's the part of the business fighting hardest just to break even. Opening an independent pharmacy is a genuinely capital-intensive undertaking, closer to a small manufacturing operation than a typical retail storefront. Detailed financial planning for a new pharmacy points to roughly $647,000 in total funding needed by month 6, not just the upfront build-out. That figure breaks down into around $165,000 in durable capital expenditure, fixtures, pharmacy systems, security, an opening inventory investment of around $90,000, and roughly $18,000 specifically for point-of-sale technology and network infrastructure. Even after the doors open, the pharmacy carries close to $12,000 a month in non-payroll overhead and nearly $20,000 a month in launch phase payroll, well before the first month of profitability. Most detailed models point toward break-even arriving around month 7, with full payback on the initial investment stretching toward 17 months. This isn't a business where a strong opening week tells you much. It's one where the first year and a half is largely about surviving long enough for the math to catch up. The build-out and the licensing are, honestly, the predictable part. Here's what actually makes running this business harder than the startup budget alone suggests. Reimbursement isn't fixed. It's a moving target you don't control. PBM contracts set what you're paid, and those rates have been trending downward for years, compressing gross margin from what used to be a comfortable range down to roughly 20% industry-wide, a genuine 10-year low. The clawback can arrive long after the sale. Direct and indirect remuneration fees let a PBM retroactively adjust what you were paid for prescriptions filled months earlier, based on performance benchmarks that are notoriously difficult to verify or dispute from the pharmacy's side, creating cash flow uncertainty that has nothing to do with how well the pharmacy is actually being run. Staffing is a genuine structural constraint. A documented shortage of pharmacy professionals, combined with real burnout in the profession, means finding and keeping qualified staff is its own ongoing operational challenge, separate from anything happening with reimbursement. Where you're licensed genuinely changes your odds. States that have passed meaningful pharmacy benefit manager reform and transparency laws, several states have moved in this direction as of today, create measurably more stable, more predictable reimbursement environments than states that haven't, meaning two identical pharmacies in different states can face genuinely different financial realities for reasons that have nothing to do with how either one is run. Assume the pharmacy is open, staffed, and stocked. Here's what it costs to simply keep operating, independent of how favorable or unfavorable this month's reimbursement environment turns out to be. Non-payroll overhead alone commonly runs close to $12,000 a month, covering rent, utilities, and a pharmacy management system, point-of-sale software, and security monitoring that together typically run around $1,200 a month before transaction fees. Payroll for a properly staffed operation, including the pharmacist in charge coverage regulations require, adds substantially more on top. And here's the number that quietly separates the pharmacies holding steady from the ones sliding backward. Marketing spend that actually protects and grows the business typically needs to run somewhere between 2 and 5% of annual revenue depending on growth phase. Yet a large share of independent pharmacies currently spend well below that, an underinvestment that compounds slowly and rarely shows up as an obvious problem in any single quarter, right up until it does. Here's the part of this industry that's genuinely shifted in recent years, and it's the reason some independent pharmacies are holding their ground while others quietly close. For a long time, filling prescriptions and billing insurance was the entire business model, and it worked because reimbursement was reasonably predictable. That era is functionally over. With margins on straightforward prescription dispensing compressed this tightly, the pharmacies that stay genuinely profitable are increasingly the ones treating clinical services, point-of-care testing, vaccinations, specialized pharmacogenomic testing as a real second revenue engine, not a nice-to-have add-on. Point-of-care testing services can generate real per-encounter revenue that PBM contracts never touch at all, sitting entirely outside the reimbursement squeeze happening at the prescription counter. Specialized testing services can carry gross margins in the 50 to 70% range, dramatically healthier than the roughly 20% the core dispensing business is currently managing. A pharmacy running even a modest volume of these services, 10 to 20 encounters a month in some categories, can generate several $1,000s in monthly profit that has nothing to do with how PBMs decide to treat that month's prescription volume. The pharmacies struggling hardest right now are almost always the ones still relying on fill and bill as their entire identity, watching a shrinking number get squeezed further every renewal cycle, without building anything alongside it that PBM contracts can't touch. The traditional dispenser runs the pharmacy primarily around prescription volume, competing on service and community relationships within a reimbursement structure they have essentially no negotiating leverage over. This owner is fully exposed to PBM rate compression and retroactive clawback risk, with owner's discretionary profit, the real measure of what this business pays its owner once salary and profit are combined, sitting toward the lower end of the roughly $150,000 to $300,000 range independents typically report. The diversified operator builds real clinical service lines alongside core dispensing, point-of-care testing, vaccination programs, specialized testing, deliberately generating revenue streams that PBM contracts and DIR fees simply don't reach. This owner absorbs the same reimbursement pressure on the dispensing side, but isn't depending on it alone, and typically lands toward the healthier end of that same discretionary profit range as a direct result. Imagine two independent pharmacies. Same location type, same roughly $650,000 in startup capital, same opening prescription volume. Pharmacy 1 runs a strong, community-focused dispensing operation, but treats clinical services as an occasional extra rather than a real business line. Prescription volume grows steadily, but as PBM reimbursement keeps compressing and a retroactive DIR clawback hits 8 months in, unexpected and difficult to dispute, gross margin drifts down toward that industry-low 20%, and owner's discretionary profit lands closer to $150,000 a year, respectable, but a fraction of what the same prescription volume would have supported a decade earlier. Pharmacy 2 builds real capacity in point-of-care testing and vaccination services from the first year, deliberately generating revenue the PBM relationship can't touch. The same reimbursement pressure and the same retroactive clawback hit their dispensing revenue just as hard. But because a meaningful share of total profit now comes from services carrying 50+% margins instead of the compressed dispensing margin alone, blended profitability holds up far better, and owner's discretionary profit lands closer to $280,000 for the year. Same reimbursement environment, same clawback. Completely different outcome, because one pharmacy built a business PBMs could still squeeze from every angle, and the other built one they couldn't. Owning a pharmacy today isn't really a bet on how many prescriptions you can fill. It's a bet on how much of your business you can build outside the reach of reimbursement rates and retroactive fees you have essentially no control over. In an industry where the rules of what you get paid can change months after the sale already happened. Whether the doors cost $600,000 to open or considerably less in a leaner market, the underlying wager is the same, that you can build enough real revenue outside the prescription counter to absorb whatever the reimbursement environment decides to do to you next, before a shrinking margin or an unexpected clawback quietly decides your year for you. Build that cushion, and this remains one of the more genuinely essential, community-rooted small businesses in this entire series. Skip it, and you're running a business where the ground can shift underneath a sale you already closed the books on.